The decision was made quietly, far from American shores, in rooms where maps mattered more than ideals and memories of defeat lingered longer than sympathy. France did not move toward rebellion out of affection, but out of calculation. As cannons rested cold and diplomats weighed risks, a distant war offered something rare, a chance to weaken a rival without fighting alone. What followed would reshape continents, not through friendship, but through strategy. When fighting broke out between Britain and its American colonies in 1775, France watched carefully. Only a decade earlier, it had emerged from the 7 Years' War defeated and diminished. Britain had stripped France of much of its North American empire, including Canada, and asserted naval dominance across the Atlantic. The loss was not merely territorial, it was strategic and psychological. French influence had receded while British power expanded, and the balance between Europe's great rivals had tilted sharply. By the time unrest began in the British colonies, France was still recovering, rebuilding its navy, and searching for an opportunity to correct that imbalance. At the center of French power stood King Louis XVI, young, cautious, and burdened by the legacy of past wars. He did not seek open conflict with Britain. France's finances were fragile, its people already strained by taxation, and another direct war carried enormous risk. Yet the rise of rebellion in America presented a rare possibility. Britain might be weakened indirectly. If the colonies succeeded, Britain would lose territory, resources, and prestige. If they failed, France could plausibly deny involvement. Either way, the unrest demanded attention. Across the Atlantic, the American cause was far from secure. The Continental Army struggled with supply shortages, inconsistent training, and uncertain political authority. The Second Continental Congress had declared independence in 1776, but words alone did not create armies or alliances. The new United States needed recognition, money, weapons, and above all, naval power. Britain's Royal Navy controlled the seas, isolating the colonies and threatening their trade. Without foreign support, the rebellion faced long odds. French interest in America was guided not by shared political philosophy, but by national interest. Enlightenment ideas circulated in Parisian salons, and some intellectuals expressed admiration for colonial resistance, but state policy followed a colder logic. France's primary desire was to weaken Britain's global position. Supporting the American rebellion offered a way to do so while avoiding immediate war. If Britain was forced to divert troops, ships, and money across the Atlantic, its ability to dominate Europe and the Caribbean would be reduced. The obstacle was uncertainty. In 1775 and 1776, the American rebels had not proven they could win. French leaders questioned whether the colonies possessed the unity, discipline, and endurance required for independence. Supporting a failed rebellion would invite British retaliation without reward. France needed evidence that the Americans could survive long enough to justify the risk. Until then, assistance would remain covert. This cautious approach shaped early French involvement. Arms and supplies were sent secretly through shell companies and intermediaries. Gunpowder, muskets, and uniforms crossed the Atlantic disguised as commercial trade. French officers volunteered unofficially, among them the young Marquis de Lafayette, who saw opportunity and honor in the American struggle. These actions allowed France to test the rebellion's strength without committing itself openly. American diplomats worked tirelessly to secure more formal support. Benjamin Franklin arrived in Paris in 1776, his reputation as a scientist and philosopher preceding him. He was not sent to charm France into friendship, but to persuade it that American success served French interests. Franklin understood the audience he faced. He emphasized British weakness, American resilience, and the strategic advantages of alliance. His presence mattered, but persuasion alone was not enough. The turning point France required came not in words, but in battle. In October 1777, American forces achieved a decisive victory at Saratoga, capturing a British army under General John Burgoyne. The significance of Saratoga extended far beyond the battlefield. It demonstrated that the American forces could defeat British regulars in a major engagement. It suggested that the rebellion was not a temporary disturbance, but a viable challenge. For France, this changed the calculation. With Saratoga, the risk shifted. Supporting the Americans now appeared less like gambling on a lost cause and more like investing in a potential partner. At the same time, France feared that Britain might reconcile with the colonies, reuniting them against European rivals. Acting sooner rather than later became essential. In early 1778, France formally recognized the United States and signed treaties of alliance and commerce. This decision transformed the war. France entered openly, committing its navy, army, and resources. The conflict expanded from a colonial rebellion into a global war, fought across Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, and the oceans between. For Britain, the strategic situation deteriorated rapidly. It now faced a powerful European rival alongside the American rebels, stretching its forces across multiple theaters. France's desire in this expanded war remained strategic clarity rather than ideological unity. French leaders sought to regain lost prestige, weaken British naval supremacy, and protect their own colonial interests. Cooperation with the Americans was necessary, but not always smooth. Differences in language, military culture, and priorities created friction. French commanders often viewed American forces as inexperienced, while Americans sometimes resented perceived condescension. Alliance did not eliminate tension, it redirected it toward a shared goal. Naval power proved decisive. French fleets challenged British control of the seas, disrupting supply lines and forcing Britain to defend its empire on multiple fronts. In the Caribbean, French and British forces clashed over sugar islands that mattered greatly to European economies. These battles mattered as much to France as events in North America. The American theater was one part of a much larger strategic contest. The most consequential cooperation came in 1781. British General Charles Cornwallis fortified his position at Yorktown, Virginia, expecting support from the Royal Navy. Instead, a French fleet under Admiral de Grasse arrived in the Chesapeake Bay and defeated British naval forces. This temporary but crucial control of the sea allowed American and French armies, under George Washington and the Comte de Rochambeau, to besiege Cornwallis. Cut off and outnumbered, the British Army surrendered. Yorktown did not end the war immediately, but it altered its outcome. British political support for continued fighting collapsed. Negotiations began, shaped by exhaustion and shifting priorities. France, having achieved much of what it sought, focused on securing favorable terms and protecting its own interests. In 1783, Britain formally recognized American independence. The result was the creation of the United States, but also a transformed global balance. Britain lost its American colonies but retained its empire elsewhere. France regained prestige and struck a blow against its rival, yet the cost was immense. The war strained French finances already under pressure. The debt incurred to support America deepened economic instability at home, contributing to unrest that would culminate in the French Revolution within a decade. Historically, France's role in creating America has often been framed as an act of generosity or shared belief. In reality, it was a calculated intervention rooted in rivalry, opportunity, and timing. France helped create America not because it sought to spread revolution, but because weakening Britain served its strategic needs. That calculation succeeded in one sense, but carried unintended consequences. For the United States, French assistance was indispensable. Without French arms, money, and naval power, independence would have been far harder to achieve. Yet the alliance also underscored a lasting reality of international politics. Nations act first in their own interest. Friendship, when it appears, is often built on aligned goals rather than shared values. The story of French involvement in the American Revolution is therefore not one of sentiment, but of convergence. Two very different societies found their interests briefly aligned against a common adversary. That alignment changed the course of history, not because it was inevitable, but because it was timely. France did not set out to create a new nation across the Atlantic. It set out to rebalance power in a competitive world. In doing so, it altered that world in ways no strategist fully anticipated. America emerged independent, France emerged indebted, and Britain emerged constrained but resilient. The consequences rippled forward, shaping revolutions, alliances, and empires long after the cannons fell silent. Understanding why France helped create America requires setting aside ideas of friendship and focusing, instead, on strategy. It is a reminder that history is often moved less by shared ideals than by intersecting interests, and that even calculated decisions can leave legacies far beyond their original intent.